Welcome to today's Leadership in Action Lunch and Learn webinar. This is the second webinar in the Awareness series. Today we will be discussing balancing life, self-care, and burnout. I'd like to welcome all of you here today who are watching, our collegiate and alumni members, as well as alumni and volunteers from Hobie, our philanthropic partner. We appreciate all of you attending and watching this webinar. I would now like to introduce our panelist today, Alyssa Wright, who is a Phi Sigma Pi Epsilon Zeta chapter alumna. Alyssa graduated from the University of Illinois with her Bachelor in Social Work and Master's in Social Work in 2013. She has been working in the mental health field for the past 6 years and has experience working with people who express difficulty with substance abuse, physical, sexual, environmental traumas, anxiety, depression, bipolar, personality disorders, family and marital stress, and relationship conflicts. She uses modalities such as eye movement desensitization reprocessing, dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, mindfulness, and guided imagery. She also has experience working with all ages, as young as 11, and her oldest client is in their 70s. Alyssa's self-care strategies include hiking in the mountains, camping, walking her dog, spending time with her husband and friends, getting regular massages, working out by weightlifting and doing CrossFit, and reading and spending time in reflection. So I want to thank Alyssa for being here today, and I will pass it over to you to get us started.
Thank you for coming and watching this webinar. I just want to take a second and have you all reflect on what brings you to watching this webinar, and allow yourselves to be proud that you are taking the steps to help prevent burnout and stress by valuing yourself enough to take care of yourself. More and more, self-care and the lack of it is becoming a growing trend that is leading to people leaving their jobs and having difficulties in their lives. Practicing self-care gives us energy to do more of what we like. It helps us feel happier in our lives, and it brings us closer to others while giving us ourselves space. Self-care is not usually something that we are taught in our schooling. It is also not something that has been traditionally advocated in the workplace, and therefore is a reason to have this conversation. Without self-care, burnout happens in our careers, families, friendships, and passions. So I'd like you to take a second and just kind of reflect on what maybe your self-care strategies are. As I said in my introduction, there's many different types of self-care strategies out there. And we're going to be talking a lot about all the different types of strategies that you can use, and maybe enhance the ones that you already have. So I have here a self-care wheel. I give this to all of my clients because it helps give a full picture of all the areas in which we may need self-care. Sometimes we do more self-care in one category versus another, and this can be a really great place for you to get ideas and learn what might be lacking in your own self-care strategies. This is a copyrighted image, and it's in the corner where you can find it, as well as a Google search of self-care wheel, or it's on Pinterest as well. We're going to be going into the self-care wheel individually. Something that I'd like for all of us to recognize is that most people have a misunderstanding of self-care because it is not something that we discuss or learn about. So there's no wrong or right way to do them, but there is a balance of how we do self-care. So we're going to move to physical and psychological. Just a little disclosure that I am human, and I also struggle with self-care. Self-care is really hard. Finding time, energy, space, intention, and consistency is one of the hardest challenges in our world and in the human experience. Balance is something that we all as humans, including myself as a therapist, are always searching for and trying to get better at. So during the webinar, I'd like you to try your best to use some self-compassion instead of shame. If the first thought is, I should be doing more of that, or I'm not doing enough, or I've done something wrong, then maybe we turn back to your compassion within and recognize that this is part of the human experience and that you are not perfect. So going into physical and psychological. So these two, I believe, are some of the most popular self-care strategies. And I think as we go on, the other sections are going to be even less popular and maybe more of what you might notice areas in your life to be working on. Physical is pretty self-explanatory: exercise, nutrition. With doctor's visits, a barrier to this is certain health insurances may not cover a lot. Maybe you have an employer that does not give you health insurance. Like, for example, I don't get insurance from my employer. So sometimes that can be a limiting factor, but making sure that you go on your regular annual checkups, getting eye checks and your dental cleanings and all of that. Sleep is a really big issue, and it can often be a catch-22 situation where we are stressed, so we don't sleep, and then we don't sleep, and then we become stressed. And so really getting a hold of that on that sleep is really important. Me time, so taking time for yourself, and breathing techniques, which is something that naturally we are able to do for ourselves. It's a natural coping mechanism, which is, we can't necessarily say that for everything. So really using our breath to help us calm our body and slow things down for us. And of course, boundaries. Boundaries is something that I'm going to talk about later on in this webinar, you will find that it's listed on almost every category. Psychological. So this is taking self-reflection time, spending time to just reflect on how your day was, what went well, what didn't go well, where you want to go in life, where you are in life. So I'm a therapist, so I'm going to recommend therapy. Therapy isn't always for people who are struggling and can't find their grasp on life. It also, I have clients that I see maybe 3-4 sessions just to get them realigned and focused on moving forward in their lives in whatever direction they feel they may want and just need a little extra feedback. Journaling, asking for and receiving help, which is necessary in your job and in your personal life. Affirmations, so that's telling yourself that your good qualities and putting a magnifying glass on the things that you are good at and what is good about you as a person. Relaxation and mindfulness. Mindfulness and meditation, which I'll talk about in a second as well, is something that is a growing trend. It also has tons of research backed behind it that shows that being mindful and meditating is one of the best practices to reduce stress and burnout and other mental health symptoms. So something that I really advocate for my clients to do, and I would for you as well, is to start looking into what it would be like to be more mindful in your life. And then boundaries as well. Moving on to emotional and spiritual, these two are I believe one of the hardest ones to work on in our lives, because it is complex and it's also not necessarily tangible. Whereas physical and psychological, we might be able to do a checklist and say that we've done this, whereas these two are less tangible. I'm going to start with spiritual, just because that is one of I think, the areas in which most people have a harder time accessing. When I say spiritual, I don't mean religious or God. I do mean being connected. And if you have a religion or you do believe in a God, that's great for you too. So spirituality is being more connected to the ground, being more grounded in our reality, in our world, being connected to folks and not feeling so alone. So in ways to do this, we go into nature, we meditate, we dance, we sing, we go to church, we pray. Maybe you go to yoga and you volunteer. So spirituality is just making sure that when we feel alone, we start to reach out and make more connections. And if we start to feel more isolated and alone, that can increase our burnout symptoms. Emotional, so that's self-compassion. It's what we talked about practicing today in the webinar. Really being kind to yourself and giving yourself credit, as well as some space to make mistakes, and know that as a human, you won't make perfection happen. Emotional expression, so that's crying, laughing, being excited. Practicing gratitude. something that is really difficult when we start to feel really stressed in our lives and overwhelmed by burdens in our lives. We have a hard time accessing what is good about our life. And gratitude can be that place where we can access that. Thanking ourselves for the good that we have in ourselves, being grateful for those who are around us, and being grateful for what we do have, our possessions, our things, our privileges, what we've been given. Forgiveness is another hard one. Forgiving people is something that is just hard for us in general, including myself. If someone hurts you or if someone treats you badly, it's hard to just let that go. But practicing forgiveness, practicing letting things go, is, just like I said, a practice. It's not something that you're going to be great at or you're going to do every single time. And so practicing it and knowing where you might struggle with it and being more willing to do that practice is a really great self-care strategy. I also put snuggling with a pet because it increases endorphins, it increases dopamine, it creates it has a neurological impact in our brain to really create happiness and positive feelings. But you don't have to necessarily do it with the pet. If you don't have one, you can also do an attachment figure item like a blanket from childhood or a stuffed animal, or maybe there's something in your home that someone gave to you that was really special, just holding on to it and connecting to it. And then also boundaries as well. And then moving on to personal and professional. Something that I've found in my practice with clients is that so many people will value their long-term goals way more than their short-term goals. We are often looking into the future and what can we accomplish more? What can we do more of? And what we want to try and do is become more short-term and middle-term focused as well, to give value to what you are doing on an individual day basis. Maybe your goal at the end of the week is to go out with your friends and have dinner. And, while that's a short-term goal and you're going to accomplish that, we need to also value the work that it takes to get you to the end of the week to do that. You might be watching this on a Monday or the start of the week, and just know that it takes many days for you to get to that Friday, and you have to put in a lot of energy and to value that for that great goal of being more connected to other people. Also doing a values card sort. So this is a technique in motivational interviewing, which is a technique that we use for folks who might be more ambivalent to change. And this is a technique that we can do to just kind of access our different values that we might hold. And maybe we recognize, I value connection, or I value giving to people. And maybe I'm not volunteering enough as much as I would like, or maybe I'm not reaching out to people as much as I would like. And that helps us realign ourselves. Also, date your mate, which is a great thing for us to do, especially if you're in a long-term relationship where things can become more automatic, more autopilot. Being more intentional with going on dates and going on activities with someone that you love and adore. Nurture your friendships. So nurturing just means, putting effort into it, being intentional, calling them, texting them more often, going to events with them, taking trips with them. Friendships are rare in adulthood, and it's something that, as far as for me, I know that it can be hard to even just make new friends as an adult. We don't get that many opportunities as we do when we're kids. And so really making sure that we nurture the ones that we have and make them stronger. If there's a friendship in your life that maybe isn't as strong as you'd like, maybe put effort into that. Paying off debt. So this can be a really great personal lift. It can lift a lot of personal stress off of us, but it's also a barrier. Not everybody can pay off debt. Maybe you're just starting out and your pay is way lower than what your debt is, or maybe you're not even just starting out, you're just in a field like mental health or medical or healthcare that could really prevent you from making enough to pay off your debt. But if you can just start paying off little by little, it can make you feel lighter and something lifted off of you. So maybe going through a debt payoff program. There's lots out there. And also saving for a trip, and there should be a comma there, as well as boundaries. So saving for a trip, just making sure that you give yourself experiences. Professional, one of the best things that I've done for myself in my professional life is taking my lunch break, going outside for my lunch break, or going to a separate space. I take an hour lunch break because I know that it takes me less than 30 minutes to eat, but sometimes it's good to have that hour to just do whatever I want, maybe make phone calls to eliminate things off my to-do list, or maybe just go for a walk around the building. Another thing is supervision and consultation regularly. So I know that a barrier with different places of work is maybe you don't have the best work environment, or maybe you don't have the best boss. That can be rare to come by. Maybe seek out mentorship and somebody that you can go to often to just get some feedback, or even just some affirmations of you're doing the best that you can, you're doing great. But seeking that regularly is really important in our professional lives. Also, taking time off and actually taking monthly mental health days. I purposefully plan my monthly mental health days, and I know when I'm going to need them. And I also take time off when I'm sick. I don't go into work when I'm feeling ill. It's important to do that because when you have the ability to, you're practicing boundaries, which we'll talk about in a second. And taking time off is so important to rejuvenate ourselves. So moving on with the webinar to our burnout symptoms. So I just want you to take a look at these symptoms and just reflect to yourself where you might lie on how many of these symptoms you might have. So anger and resentment, feeling anger and resentment towards folks, not just in the workplace, but in your personal life, but specifically in the workplace. Maybe resenting coworkers for, you're putting in all of this effort and they may not be matching that. That's a good reflection on, am I working harder than I'm now filling myself up? So the balance between I'm giving too much of myself and I'm not giving to myself. Being annoyed and irritated at others. So you might find that you go home and you might be more irritated and you might be having more problems in your relationships. And this could be a really great reflection on maybe I'm burnt out at work or burnt out in other areas of my life. Feeling easily fatigued or tired in general. So if you're finding that you're getting the recommended 6 to 8 hours or more of sleep and you're still feeling fatigued or tired, this could be a really great opportunity for you to reflect on, maybe there's an imbalance happening in my life. Increased boredom, whether that's with your job or with other things that you once found enjoyable. Forgetfulness, so maybe you're forgetting things while you walk out the door. Oh my gosh, I forgot my coffee on the table, or I forgot my keys, or I forgot to take something out of the freezer for food, or maybe at work where, you forget a deadline or you forget to edit something that you normally would have. If you're starting to notice that the things that were once easy for you to remember are now hard, that might be a reflection on your burnout level as well. Unexplainable sadness and despair. So I get clients in my practice all the time who will come in and say, my relationship with my significant other is great, and I have all of these self-care strategies that I'm doing, whether it be running or yoga or meditating, and yet I still feel sad and I don't know why. This could be a reflection on other areas in your life not feeling very fulfilled. Less interaction with your friends and family, so feeling more isolated, or maybe choosing to not go out because you feel exhausted. While there is a a value to taking care of yourself and doing me time where you don't go out with people. If you're doing that a lot and you find yourself isolating more, this could be a reflection on burnout. More disappointment with others. So you find that people aren't living up to your expectations, or you have these high expectations of other people. That is also another possible symptom of burnout. And lastly, experiencing physical symptoms of migraines, headaches, body stiffness, lingering colds and sickness, or maybe getting sick more often. These are all reflections on where burnout could possibly be present. And as you reflect on these symptoms, maybe you're noticing that you fall into a certain category, whether it be 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, or 6 plus. If you're finding that you fit 1 to 2 symptoms, maybe start being more intentional in your life. This is, 1 to 2 symptoms is typically a response to stress. It's not necessarily something that we should be extremely worried about, because life is stressful. And a question that I get is, what's good or what's bad stress? I think that we stress no matter what. And I think it's not about eliminating stress. It's just about managing stress. So it depends on the intensity, how big does it feel, the duration, how long is it lasting, and that can be a great way to know whether or not we're experiencing some burnout. 3 to 4 symptoms, we might want to begin self-care. Things are starting to escalate, and when we start to approach 4 symptoms or more, that's when it can kind of steamroll and become even a bigger issue. For example, like I said with sleep, if sleep is one of those symptoms, if we don't take care of that, it can then lead to now we're so tired we aren't working out, and that makes us makes us more irritable. It makes us not take care of ourselves, and it starts to increase other symptoms. So we want to prevent that. 5 to 6 symptoms, we're getting up there, and we really want to make self-care as a priority, and we want to consider placing boundaries. So that will be discussed in a couple more slides. 6 plus symptoms, boundaries are absolutely needed. We need to start taking care of ourselves and having it be the priority. And we need to consider making some changes so that this doesn't become a long-term experience. Chronic stress can become a really big issue for folks. There's a phrase that I use often in my practice from Dr. Daniel Siegel, which is so the phrase goes, what we do more often, we get wired. So what fires together wires together. So the more we are stressed, our body tends to then become in a stressful state, and our body learns to be stressed. And that can then lead to chronic mental health issues as well as stress issues. So maybe we have developed an anxiety issue or some depression, and maybe now we could also have some PTSD from work. So this can lead to people quitting jobs, losing relationships, chronic health and stress issues. So we really want to be taking care of ourselves if we have 6 plus symptoms. So now we're going to move on to cultural barriers of self-care. With everything, there's always going to be some barriers to doing it, which is why we want to give ourselves self-compassion and know that we are human beings, and there's always going to be a challenge on achieving what we're trying to achieve. But for some folks, it's going to be harder than others. So gender plays a role in accessing self-care. Females tend to have to prove themselves more, whether that be in the workplace or in their personal space, but they're more likely to participate in self-care. So self-care may be easier for females, but they may need more of it because they have to prove themselves more. Males tend to not practice self-care due to this shame response of, I need to be better, I need to toughen it up, I need to not show that I'm stressed. But they are capable of setting more boundaries because of their privilege in the workplace or in their personal life. but they may find themselves burning out more because of their not necessarily being willing to practice that self-care. And then we also have transgender or non-binary, or maybe gender non-conforming, where there's just an added stress and fear of, whether it's in the workplace of having to come out, or people asking about them, or having to prove themselves and be taken seriously. And that just can be just a burden that is just an umbrella that kind of hangs over them. Occupation. So work culture is a big deal, and that can play a huge role into how we actually practice self-care. And so depending on what sector you work in, so whether it be healthcare, healthcare is one of the highest rates of burnout in the country. That's, ER, emergency room folks, nurses, mental health practitioners, or folks who are working in mental health field, medical field. That is the highest burnout rate, as well as construction workers and folks who are doing labor, because it's not something that we necessarily advocate for self-care in. Again, we don't talk about this often. It's not taught. It's something that we actually have to just learn sometimes by mistakes. So if you have a work culture that values working hard, self-sacrifice, long hours, not taking your vacation, this can be the hardest challenge to overcome, because it's so ingrained in the culture. And it's sometimes not anything that you can do to change, but it is something that you do have choice in putting up boundaries, which we'll talk about in a second. Again, with occupation, depending on where you work, is the leadership practicing self-care. Leadership are our role models, and they model good self-care. And if our leaders, our supervisors are not doing that, then our staff won't be doing that either. And they approve your values. They will say, they will give you affirmation if it's okay to take a day off or not. And you'll feel that. Is taking a day off positive or negative? And that's going to affect how you practice that self-care. But again, while it affects it, you still have choices. And then just being able to be heard and understood in your workplace, that's really important. And if you don't have that, then that's why we need to definitely be practicing other self-care strategies to help that. Another cultural impact is debt. So being part of the millennial culture, I know that I have high college student loan debt, and I have low wages. And so there's a barrier to self-care when we are trying to pay off debt and we have all this debt, but we're also trying to take care of ourselves. And this can also increase stress of like, when am I going to be able to just not have to pay off all this stress? So yes, that's a barrier. Again, this is also something that we have choices on, and how much we let it affect us, and how much we, and maybe letting some of that go, letting us kind of be okay with all of that, and knowing it's part of a big cultural experience. Working families with children. So this is a barrier in that, you have less time. There's more going on. You have less ability to say no because the kids come first. Clear and healthy boundaries are hard to balance because having a family is very fluid. You can't be so strict on this is what's going to happen. Things will happen and you will have to adjust. And so what you thought was a boundary, you might need to extend for somebody depending on where they're at in life. And then discrimination, prejudice, and fear, if that exists in your life as well as your workplace, I think the barriers are that we don't feel trust, we can't reach out. And so really acknowledging that maybe the choice is to move on from a workplace that has that, or maybe a choice is to go to therapy and kind of work through some of how that affects you. So let's talk a little bit about boundaries. I said boundaries probably many, many times throughout this webinar, and that's because that's one of the most important things for us to do to help decrease burnout. Setting boundaries are important in most areas of our life, if not all, and it is one of the hardest things to do because it is the practice of actively saying no, even when you may want to say yes or when you feel you could say yes. There's a lot of people will think, oh, I could totally take this on at work, or yes, I can do that for you in my personal life. And maybe at that time it doesn't feel so big, and maybe it's simple, or maybe it feels like you can get it done quickly. But if you're going through a lot and you have a lot going on, another thing is just another thing to worry about. And so maybe practicing no when it's easier to say no, then when it's hard to say no, you might actually be able to do that. Again, this is a practice. It is not something that you are going to be good at or you are going to be perfect at. And you will probably, I tell all my clients, because I do it too, I fail at saying no when I should say no. But practicing it and trying your best to do it as often as you can in the best ways possible is going to help you. So saying no is also, or putting boundaries up, is also a practice of being intentional of your energy and time. But it's hard. And so it's hard because taking time for yourself without guilt is difficult, but it can be done. Using a mantra of, I cannot be everything to everyone without being nothing to myself. You cannot give yourself to everybody without leaving nothing for yourself. And so making sure that you have space for yourself and giving yourself what you need is really important, and that's a boundary that we can place. Self-compassion and self-empathy, again, talking to yourself kindly and acknowledging your weaknesses and where your limitations are, and being okay with that, because we all have them. And also talking to yourself like you would talk to a friend or a child. And I love this one because if a child is stressed out and is really asking for help, or really fearing asking for help, we would lean into them and say, let's drop something. Let's help you be more childlike. And I think that there's always this inner child within us that is wanting more space, wanting more fun, wanting more time. And if we can talk to ourselves like we are just our inner children, sometimes it can really help us give a perspective and say, you know what, I really can say no to this. And someone else I would give this advice to. And why do we need boundaries? Without them, we empty our tank without refilling. I tell all my clients, and I give an analogy of that we're all just, human gas tanks. And if we empty ourselves completely, it takes so much more energy and time to refill us. But if we constantly refill ourselves when we get 3/4 empty, we can fill ourselves so much more quickly and easier. Without boundaries, we become resentful and angry. And without boundaries, we don't have any space for ourselves. And with boundaries, we have more energy, and we could do more actually with more boundaries. And then this idea of, where did the time go? When we don't have boundaries, we just do, and then we don't actually live. And so with boundaries, it allows us to have more of an intentional and present life.
And with that being said, I want to thank Alyssa so much for taking the time to record this webinar. And if you do have any questions about self-care or burnout or living your balanced life, preventing that, please feel free to email us at the national office or email me, and I will be sure to get some answers for you and possibly even pass those along to Alyssa to get you in contact with her. And I just wanted to say thank you again. Congratulations. You have earned 8 Leadership and Action Points for watching the webinar today. And you want to remember your goal is to reach 75 points to earn your Leadership and Action certification. Remember, you can earn more points by participating in LIA modules, monthly tweet meets, and Lunch and Learn webinars. And to continue this conversation that Alyssa has started here with us today, I would invite you to join in next month at the Tweet Neat Twitter chat as we discuss living a balanced life. And that is taking place on Thursday, November 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can register for that at phi-sigma-pi.org/tweetandneat. And the next Lunch and Learn will be on Wednesday, November 14th at 12 p.m. Eastern. And this is the conclusion to our awareness series this term. And the topic is emotional intelligence. And you can register for that at phi-sigma-pi.org/lunch and learn. And thank you again, Alyssa, for taking the time to speak with us today and enlighten us all about self-care and how to prevent burnout. And that does it for today's Leadership in Action Lunch and Learn webinar. Lead on.
Thank you so much.